When you picture a samurai charging into battle, what comes to mind? For many, it's probably the image of a lone warrior, katana flashing,
Yeah.
engaged in a dramatic one-on-one duel.
Hmm.
But let me ask you this. What if that iconic image, the one so prevalent in movies and games, isn't the full story?
Yeah.
What if the katana wasn't always the primary weapon and those elegant duels were actually, well, quite rare?
That's exactly right. Welcome to this deep dive where we're setting aside the romanticized legends and uncovering the fascinating realities of the samurai.
We are.
We've sifted through a range of sources for you, from comprehensive encyclopedic entries to lively online discussions among historians,
Right.
to bring you a richer understanding of what it truly meant to be a samurai in Japan.
Exactly. You, our listener, might already have some familiarity with samurai through various forms of media. Our goal here isn't to dismiss those portrayals, but to take you further, to explore their origins, their effectiveness in warfare, often quite brutal, actually, the surprising evolution of their armor, and even the significant yet sometimes overlooked roles of women within samurai society.
Okay.
We want to move beyond the tropes and give you a much more nuanced picture.
So where did these powerful warrior networks even begin? It's not like they suddenly materialized, fully armed and armored.
Okay, let's unpack this together. Picture this. Around the same time that the imperial court and even powerful monasteries were developing their own private security forces,
Huh.
local leaders in the more distant provinces started forming their own armed groups. Think of it as communities organizing for mutual defense, maybe.
Sort of, but these were more structured and led by prominent figures.
Mm-hmm.
What's fascinating here is that these weren't just casual militias, they were hierarchical.
Okay.
You had influential leaders like Taira no Masakato is a good example,
Mm-hmm.
who commanded a considerable number of lower-ranking warriors. This vertical organization, this chain of command, allowed for the creation of substantial private military forces that could exert real power.
And here's where it gets interesting for you. The imperial court, which theoretically had its own military,
In theory, yeah.
increasingly found itself relying on these private warrior bands to maintain order in the provinces. Over time, this reliance grew so significant that the court even created official military and police positions,
Right, legitimizing them.
essentially legitimizing these warrior leaders and giving them formal responsibilities. Of course, as you can imagine, these leaders often delegated the actual on-the-ground work to their subordinates.
Mhm.
This shift in power is a key moment, really, in understanding the rise of the samurai.
This shift in power dynamic is indeed crucial. It marks a significant step in the emergence of the samurai as a distinct and influential force in Japanese society. They moved beyond simply local defense to becoming integral to the very structure of authority.
Now, when you think of a samurai, the iconic armor is probably one of the first things that comes to mind.
Definitely.
We all have this image of those elaborate, almost artistic suits. But, as you might guess, it wasn't always that way, and the armor definitely evolved over time to meet the changing demands of warfare.
Absolutely. The yoroi is likely the armor you're picturing, that very grand and ornate style.
Mm-hmm.
However, by the late Kamakura period, even senior samurai started to favor the dumaru.
Why was that?
Well, it suggests that the yoroi, despite its impressive appearance, was becoming less practical for the evolving styles of combat. Maybe it signaled a shift towards greater agility on the battlefield.
So the Dumaru was the more cutting-edge design, and what made it different for the samurai wearing it?
Initially, the dumaru primarily protected the torso, just the body. But as higher-ranking samurai adopted it, they began adding essential components like the kabuto,
The helmet.
the helmet, right, and shoulder guards. It was a more adaptable system, kind of allowed for customization based on rank and preference.
And what about the warriors who weren't at the top of the hierarchy? They likely couldn't afford the full Dumaru setup.
Nicely. For lower-ranking samurai, the harade was introduced. This was a much simpler design, offering protection only to the front of the torso and the sides of the abdomen.
Just the vital spots.
Yeah, the most vulnerable areas. Think of it as a more budget-conscious option for those who needed protection, but didn't have the resources for the full duchimaru.
Makes sense.
Later, in the late Kamakura period, we see the development of the haramaki. This was essentially an extension of the harade, providing crucial protection for the back,
Oh, important.
which, as you can imagine, is vital in the chaos of battle.
Okay, so we're seeing this trend towards more practical and perhaps less cumbersome armor. This makes perfect sense when you consider the realities of warfare.
It goes.
Speaking of which, one of the major turning points in samurai history has to be the Mongol invasions. Those events must have profoundly shaped their military thinking and their sense of identity.
Absolutely. The two attempts by Kublai Khan's Yuan dynasty to invade Japan in 1274 and 1281 were pivotal moments.
Really pivotal.
Imagine this, from your perspective. In 1274, the Mongols sent a formidable force, something like 40,000 men and 900 ships to northern Kyushu.
Wow.
Compared to the approximately 10,000 samurai the Japanese could initially mobilize, they were significantly outnumbered.
That sounds like an overwhelming challenge. How did the Japanese manage to withstand such a massive force?
Well, in the first invasion, the weather played a critical role. Major thunderstorms repeatedly struck the Mongol forces throughout their campaign.
Really? Like, just bad luck for the Mongols.
You could say that. It inflicted substantial casualties and ultimately forced them to withdraw. Interestingly, the Mongols also deployed small bombs.
Bombs?
Yeah, which were likely the first use of gunpowder weaponry in Japan.
Wow. Okay, so a bit of luck in the form of nature intervened. But the Japanese weren't just going to rely on chance this second time, were they?
Exactly. Recognizing the very real threat of another invasion, the Japanese took decisive action. Starting in 1276, they began constructing a massive stone barrier along the coastline of Hakata Bay.
A huge wall.
Yeah, this defensive wall, stretching for about 20 kilometers, became a formidable obstacle for any invading fleet.
Smart move.
Meanwhile, the Mongols attempted diplomatic overtures between 1275 and 1279, but each envoy they sent was met with a stark refusal. They were executed.
Executed. Seriously.
Yeah. Hushu Tokimune, the Shikin, essentially the regent and de facto ruler at the time, famously refused any negotiation. The graves of these executed envoys still exist today in both Kamakura and Akata,
Wow.
a powerful reminder of the unwavering Japanese stance.
That's some serious resolve, and it set the stage for the even larger second invasion in 1281.
Precisely. This time, the Yuan army was even larger, a staggering force of around 140,000 men aboard some 5,000 ships.
140,000. That's incredible.
While the Japanese had significantly strengthened their defenses, numbering around 40,000, they still faced an enormous threat.
Still vastly outnumbered.
And once again, just as the Mongol forces were preparing to land a major assault, a massive typhoon struck northern Kyushu.
Another storm? You're kidding.
Nope. The sheer devastation caused by this typhoon, combined with the determined defense of the Hakata Bay barrier by the samurai, led to another decisive defeat for the Mongols.
And this is the origin of the famous Kami no Kaze, the divine wind.
Yes. These two instances of major storms miraculously thwarting the Mongol invasions were interpreted as divine intervention,
You can see why.
reinforcing a powerful belief that Japan was under supernatural protection. The kaminokaze became a potent symbol of this divine favor and played a significant role in shaping Japanese national identity and a sense of, well, invincibility.
It's incredible how these events shape not only their military history, but also their cultural and spiritual beliefs. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the nitty-gritty of samurai warfare itself. Forget the graceful katana duels you might have seen in movies for a moment. What were the primary weapons and tactics they actually employed on the battlefield?
Well, if you're picturing primarily sword-on-sword clashes, that's a common misconception, largely thanks to popular culture.
Okay.
In reality, spears and polearms like the yari and naginata were often the dominant weapons on the battlefield.
Spears, not swords.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
The katana served more as a secondary weapon, a sidearm, much like an officer's pistol in later Western armies. Some historical accounts even suggest that in large-scale engagements, the katana might have been less effective than a good spear in the hands of a well-trained foot soldier.
That's a different image than most of us probably have. So these longer-reaching weapons were more practical for the kind of formation fighting and cavalry encounters that likely characterize most battles.
Exactly. And as warfare evolved, so did samurai weaponry. In the periods before the relatively peaceful Tokugawa shogunate, when large-scale conflict was more frequent,
Right, more chaotic times.
you'd see a greater emphasis on specialized cavalry weapons, like the larger dudachi, various types of yari, and the versatile naginata. The yumi, or bow, was also incredibly important.
Archery, too.
Providing ranged attack capabilities and proving deadly in the hands of skilled archers, both mounted and on foot. You can see parallels here with European knights and their lances, perhaps, and also the Mongol horse archers and their effective hit-and-run tactics.
So in those earlier, more volatile times, there was a greater emphasis on horseback combat and ranged attacks.
Yes. But then the long period of peace under the Tokugawa shogunate brought about a significant shift in military focus.
Things change.
Big time. With fewer large-scale battles, the emphasis moved towards practical self-defense in more urban environments.
Hmm.
The heavy armor and specialized cavalry weapons became less essential,
Right.
and the katana and wakizashi gained prominence as weapons for quick drawing and close-quarters combat against unarmored opponents. This era saw the development of sophisticated sword-drawing techniques and formalized schools of iaijutsu, the art of the quick draw.
Almost like the dueling culture of the early American West, but with swords instead of pistols.
A fair comparison.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to understand that samurai weren't limited to just swords.
Ah.
They were trained in the use of a wide array of weapons, literally whatever might be effective in a given situation, even including improvised weapons like rocks if necessary,
Really?
if needed. Historical sources mention proficiency in bows, the great udachi, various types of spears, yari, the glaive-like naginata, axes, masakari, hammers, flails, the iron club, kanabu, the staffju, the chain and sickle, kusarigama, and even throwing blades, shuriken.
So a real martial arts tradition encompassing a wide range of tools. Now let's address another common image, the dramatic samurai cavalry charge, a staple in many historical films. Was that a central tactic in their warfare?
That's another area where popular depictions can be somewhat misleading. While samurai certainly utilized cavalry, the kind of massive, decisive charges you see with heavily armored European knights were actually quite rare, particularly during the Sengoku period, the Warring States era.
Why was that?
Well, the Japanese horses of the time were generally smaller and less powerful compared to their Eurasian counterparts. They struggled to effectively carry a fully armored warrior at a full gallop for any significant distance, and had other limitations, like often lacking iron horseshoes, which made them less suited for sustained charges on varied terrain.
So not quite the thunderous impact of European heavy cavalry we often see in historical accounts.
Not at all. The primary roles of cavalry for samurai were more in the realm of mobile archery platforms, rapid movement across the battlefield for reconnaissance or delivering messages,
Logistics, scouting.
and for pursuing enemies who were already in retreat and disorganized. The occasional small-scale, tightly formed charge, like those innovated by the Takeda clan, were considered significant tactical developments, precisely because they weren't the standard practice.
Interesting. So what about the foot soldiers, the Ashiguru? What role did they play in these battles, and how did their equipment influence samurai tactics?
The Ashiguru, or foot soldiers, became increasingly vital, especially with the widespread adoption of long spears, yari, and later, the revolutionary Tanegashima.
The matchlock musket.
Exactly, the matchlock musket. These developments fundamentally altered battlefield tactics and, consequently, the equipment and roles of the samurai themselves.
How so?
Infantry formations wielding long spears could create a formidable defense against cavalry, negating the impact of mounted attacks, and the introduction of firearms provided a powerful ranged element that traditional samurai weaponry couldn't match.
Firearms. Samurai armies with guns. That's another image that doesn't always feature prominently in popular portrayals.
Absolutely. Matchlock firearms were introduced to Japan by the Portuguese in 1543.
Okay.
And the Japanese were remarkably quick to adopt, adapt, and even improve upon this technology, establishing large-scale domestic production under the name Tanegashima.
They made their own.
Oh yeah. By the end of the Sengoku period, the number of arquebuses in Japan was staggering, likely in the hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands.
Wow. Battlefield tactics evolved to incorporate Ashiguru fighting in disciplined, close-order formations, utilizing both their long spears for defense and their Tanegashima for ranged firepower.
So formations became key.
Very much so. This shift led to a decline in the battlefield prominence of the naginata and a longer tachi sword in favor of the nagamaki, and the shorter, lighter katana, which was more practical in the close-quarters combat that often followed volleys of gunfire.
Makes sense.
The tachi itself, often shortened to become a katana, transitioned into more of a symbol of authority and status for higher-ranking samurai.
Ah, interesting.
The grand adachi, while largely obsolete on the battlefield, was sometimes still wielded by Sengoku daimyo to project an image of bravery and martial prowess among their troops. Kind of for show, maybe?
So the battlefield was becoming less about individual heroic combat with the sword and more about coordinated formations of infantry armed with spears and firearms. It sounds like a significant shift in military thinking and technology.
Huge shift.
Now, let's step back and look at the broader social and political context in which the samurai operated. It wasn't a static system, was it? There were significant transformations over time.
Far from it. The Nanbokuchu period, 1336 to 1392, marked by the establishment of the rival southern and northern imperial courts,
Right, the split.
was a time of considerable political and social upheaval. Even after the eventual reunification under the Ashikaga shogunate, the increasing involvement of lower-class foot soldiers in battles, you see this with the growing popularity of Haramaki armor among them, indicates a changing social dynamic on the battlefield.
Hmm.
Inheritance disputes and internal conflicts among samurai families became more prevalent as the principle of primogeniture gained traction, leading to frequent skirmishes between neighboring domains and internal power struggles within clans.
And this is the era that gives rise to the Sengoku daimyo, those powerful, independent warlords of the warring states, period.
Exactly. These Sengoku daimyo differed significantly from the earlier Shugo daimyo, who were essentially provincial governors appointed by the shogunate.
How are they different?
The Sengoku daimyo gained de facto independent rule over their territories, often through military strength and strategic alliances. Interestingly, many of these daimyo rose from diverse
Oh,
backgrounds,
yeah.
including not just former Shugo daimyo, but also their deputies and even local landowners who seized opportunities during the chaos of the era.
Right. Upheaval creates opportunity.
Precisely. The Sengoku period was characterized by a relative loosening of traditional samurai social structures, allowing individuals from lower social classes, such as the remarkable Toyotomi Hideyoshi,
A famous example.
to rise through the ranks based on their abilities and achievements to become powerful samurai and even the imperial regent.
Hideyoshi's rise from a peasant background to one of the most powerful figures in the country is an incredible story of social mobility. But that kind of fluidity in the social hierarchy didn't last, did it?
No, it didn't. Hideyoshi himself implemented a pivotal change with his famous sword hunt edict.
The sword hunt.
Yeah, which effectively prohibited non-samurai from owning or carrying weapons. This act was crucial in solidifying the samurai as a permanent and hereditary warrior caste,
Blocking it down.
bringing an end to that era of significant social mobility that had characterized the Sengoku period, at least until the fall of the Tokugawa shogunate centuries later.
Right.
It's important to remember that in the 16th century, prior to Hideyoshi's rule, many adult males, even farmers, were part of some form of military organization,
Everyone is armed.
contributing to a very fluid and often violent all-against-all environment. The samurai families that were officially recognized and legitimized after the establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate in the 17th century were largely those who had aligned themselves with the eventual victors of the Sengoku period: Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu.
So a long and often brutal process of consolidation that ultimately defined who belonged to the samurai class and who did not. Now, we mentioned Hideyoshi's ambitions. They weren't confined to the Japanese islands, were they? Let's discuss the invasions of Korea.
That's right. In 1592 and again in 1597, under the leadership of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Japan launched massive military campaigns with the ambitious goal of conquering China by first subjugating the Korean peninsula.
Huge goal.
These were enormous undertakings, involving approximately 160,000 soldiers, a mix of samurai and conscripted peasants. These were some of the largest military mobilizations in East Asia until the late 19th century.
Really? That big?
Yeah. Initially, the Japanese samurai armies, drawing upon their extensive combat experience from the Sengoku period and their effective use of the arquebus,
Those guns again.
achieved significant successes on the Korean peninsula. Notable generals like Kachiko Masa, Konishi Yukinaga, and Shimazu Yoshihiro led these initial advances.
But ultimately, these grand campaigns ended in failure. What were the key factors that led to the Japanese withdrawal?
Several critical factors contributed to the eventual failure of the invasions. The Korean Navy, under the brilliant leadership of Admiral Yi Sun-sin,
Admiral Yi.
maintained naval superiority, severely disrupting Japanese supply lines and hindering their ability to effectively sustain their forces on land. The intervention of substantial Ming Dynasty forces, coming to the aid of their Korean allies,
China got involved.
presented a major military obstacle that the Japanese were ultimately unable to overcome. Additionally, Korean guerrilla resistance inflicted significant casualties and disrupted Japanese control in the occupied territories.
Fighting back on all fronts.
Exactly. As the long and costly wars dragged on, Japanese commitment wavered, and there was likely an underestimation of the resilience and determination of the Korean people. Ultimately, following Hideyoshi's death in 1598, the decision was made to withdraw all Japanese forces from Korea.
So, a costly and ultimately unsuccessful foreign endeavor that likely had significant ramifications for Japan internally as well. Now, let's move forward to the Tokugawa shogunate. This is often the period that many associate with the quintessential samurai.
The Edo period.
But their role in society underwent yet another significant transformation during this era of prolonged peace, didn't it?
Absolutely. Following his decisive victory at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, Tokugawa Ieyasu successfully consolidated his power, formally establishing the Tokugawa shogunate in 1603.
The start of a long peace.
This marked the beginning of a remarkable period of approximately 250 years of relative peace and stability, following the final major conflict of the Siege of Osaka in 1615. During this Edo period, the samurai truly became a hereditary social class.
Fixed in place.
Many samurai who had previously lived in rural areas were now required to reside in castle towns, serving their daimyo in administrative and bureaucratic roles rather than primarily as active warriors.
So less fighting, more paperwork?
Kind of, yeah. With the prolonged absence of large-scale warfare, their traditional military function gradually diminished. Neo-Confucianism gained significant influence as the official ideology, and the rigid four-class system, with samurai at the top, was formally established.
The hierarchy solidified.
Landed samurai were faced with a choice: relinquish their land and become stipend-receiving retainers serving their lord in the castle towns, or remain on their land as peasants, further solidifying the separation between their identity and direct military service.
So they transitioned from being primarily fighting men to more of a ruling and administrative class, maintaining social order rather than engaging in constant warfare?
Precisely. Their primary duties shifted from the battlefield to maintaining social hierarchy, enforcing laws, and serving their lords in various administrative capacities. However, it's worth noting that the martial spirit of the samurai didn't entirely disappear. They made one last significant appearance in their traditional military role during the Boshin War in 1867,
Ah, the Civil War.
where forces loyal to the imperial court, largely composed of samurai from domains like Chushu and Satsuma, ultimately defeated the forces of the shogunate, paving the way for the Meiji Restoration.
So a final resurgence of their warrior identity before their formal dissolution. And that brings us to the Meiji Restoration and the official end of the samurai class.
Yes. By the 1870s, the samurai population constituted roughly 5% of the total population of Japan.
Only 5%.
About that, yeah. Although many lower-ranking samurai had played a crucial role in the Meiji Restoration itself, the new Meiji government viewed the samurai class as an outdated feudal institution that held a monopoly on military power and, to a significant extent, on education and political influence.
They wanted modernization.
Exactly. A key priority of the Meiji government was to modernize Japan rapidly, and this included gradually dismantling the samurai class and integrating its members into the emerging professional, military, and business sectors of the new Meiji state. This was a period of massive social and economic upheaval and transformation.
A monumental shift in Japanese society. Now, we focused primarily on the male samurai. What about the women of the samurai class? Their stories and contributions often seem to be less well known.
That's a crucial point to consider. While they weren't typically on the front lines in the same way as men, women of the samurai class held significant roles and responsibilities within samurai society.
Like,
Their primary duty was the management and maintenance of the household, especially during the frequent absences of their husbands in the earlier feudal periods. The wife, often referred to as Okugara-sama,
the lady of the house.
was responsible for overseeing all household affairs, raising the children, and importantly was also expected to defend the home in the event of attack.
Defend the home.
Yes. This is why many women of the samurai class received martial training, particularly in wielding weapons like the naginata and the kaiken dagger,
The polearm and dagger.
and in the art of close-quarters combat known as tandojutsu. While large-scale female participation in major battles is less documented, there are certainly accounts of women engaging in smaller conflicts to protect their homes and families.
So far from being passive figures, they were expected to be capable and resilient, able to protect their households and families when necessary.
Absolutely, and in samurai society, political marriages were a significant duty for daughters, serving as a crucial tool for forging and maintaining alliances between clans.
Alliance builders.
These women often found themselves navigating complex political landscapes and intrigues within their new households.
Right.
Divorce, while not common, was a possibility under certain circumstances, like mistreatment or a husband's betrayal.
Okay.
While generally considered subordinate to men in the broader societal structure and excluded from formal political affairs and household headship,
Uh-huh.
samurai women could and did wield considerable power and influence indirectly. History provides examples such as Hinotomiko, Nene Yorodono, and Tachibana Ginchiyo, who exerted significant influence behind the scenes.
Indirect power.
Finances were often entrusted to the management of wives, and as you might know, there were even instances of female imperial rulers throughout Japanese history.
And there are actual documented cases of women actively participating in battle alongside the men, aren't there?
Yes, there are. Lady Ishikawa famously defended Koramine Castle for 10 days while her husband was away,
Wow.
even reportedly leading a charge against the attacking forces. And during the Boshin War, a group of women from the Aizu domain formed the Joshigen,
A women's army.
a women's army of around 20 to 30 individuals who actively fought and defended Tsuruga Castle against imperial forces, wielding halberds, short swords, and even commanding artillery pieces.
Incredible. That really shows their training wasn't just for show.
Not at all. These examples clearly illustrate their martial training and their willingness to fight and defend their loyalties and their homes.
Powerful stories that really challenge the often male-centric narrative of samurai history. Finally, let's touch on the enduring cultural legacy of the samurai. Their influence extends far beyond the historical battlefield, doesn't it?
Immensely so. Samurai are a central and enduring theme in jidaigeki, Japanese historical dramas in film and television.
Of course.
Interestingly, there are fascinating parallels to be drawn between samurai films and classic westerns, and they've influenced each other significantly in terms of themes and storytelling.
Right, like Kurosawa.
Exactly. The renowned filmmaker Akira Kurosawa, for example, had a profound impact on Western cinema, with his works directly inspiring iconic films like Star Wars and remakes of Seven Samurai as Magnificent Seven and Your Jimbo as A Fistful of Dollars.
Huge influence.
There's even a compelling anime adaptation of Seven Samurai titled Samurai 7, demonstrating the enduring appeal of the story.
And their popularity isn't confined to Japan, is it? We're seeing a growing and continued interest in samurai in America and across the globe.
Absolutely. In the 21st century, samurai have become increasingly popular in America through various forms of media. The animated series Afro Samurai,
Yeah, I know that one.
with its unique blend of chanbar action and urban music, developed a significant cult following. Originally a doujinshi manga, it was adapted into a successful animated series, a feature film, and video games, showcasing a modern interpretation of the samurai archetype.
Cool fusion.
Samurai themes have also found their way into mainstream comic books and television series like Power Ranger Samurai, demonstrating a continued fascination with the warrior ethos and the iconic imagery.
It's clear that the image of the samurai, even if often romanticized, continues to captivate audiences across cultures and time periods.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, let's quickly summarize some of the key insights we've uncovered.
Good idea.
We've traced the evolution of the samurai from provincial warrior lands to a dominant military and eventually administrative class. We've highlighted the crucial role of various weapons beyond just the katana,
Spears, bows.
with spears and bows often being primary battlefield tools. We've examined how major historical events like the Mongol invasions profoundly shaped their history and sense of identity.
The divine wind.
And we've explored the significant social and political transformations that the samurai class underwent, culminating in its eventual dissolution in the Meiji era.
And it's so important for you, our listener, to remember how the historical reality of the samurai often differs quite significantly from the more glamorous and idealized portrayals we frequently encounter in popular culture.
Definitely. Which raises a final thought for you to consider.
Yeah.
How does the legacy of the samurai continue to resonate, not only within Japanese culture, but also globally? What specific aspects of their history, their image, their supposed code of honor do you think hold the most appeal, and why?
Something to chew on.
We encourage you to further explore the specific periods, figures, or aspects of samurai history that we've touched upon today. There's a vast and fascinating world waiting to be discovered beyond the well-worn myths.